Ultima 4: The Quest of the Avatar was released in 1985 and represents a massive change in the direction of the series. So much so that this is the game that many consider the beginning of the Ultima series. Up to this point, the games in the series were mostly disconnected, and in a way, all of the links between the stories were more conjecture than canon. But Ultima 4 begins to wrap everything together to create a consistent story and universe across the games. The first 3 games are now called The Dark Ages of Britannia, and the manual retells the story of the games leading up to Ultima 4, rewriting some of the events of the games or keeping them intentionally vague, such as not mentioning the true nature of Exodus. And so, the story of Ultima 4 begins, from the ruins of the devastated lands, laid to waste and transformed irrevocably by the 3 evils. Lord British rises as a leader, unifying the people of the lands under his rule, leading warriors to drive away most of the remaining minions of the Triad of Evil. With this newfound peace, many societal changes are undertaken. 3 important locations were built: the Lyceum, a place of learning; the Empath Abbey, to foster the good nature people have within them; and the Serpent's Hold, where great warriors would train to protect the realm from whatever evils that may be. The realm of Sosaria, now known as Britannia, seems to be heading to a new age of peace and prosperity, with philosophers contemplating that instead of looking into the aggressive and violent past, the people of the land should look inwards into ourselves. How can we live in peace with the world if we are not in peace with ourselves? Wondering whether there is someone in the world who could walk the path of true enlightenment. This path is the quest of the Avatar. As you begin the game, you are faced with the first noticeable change. The game now has an introduction sequence where your story is told. And that indeed is the purpose of this sequence. The main character is not intended to be some random fantasy character, but a representation of you, the player. You might say, your avatar. Indeed, one of the accolades Ultima 4 can claim is popularizing the term avatar in reference to a player character in video games. As you wander in a park, contemplating your fast-paced 80s life, a blue moon gate appears and disappears, leaving behind some important items: an ankh, a map, and 2 books. These refer to the materials that came with the game itself: the cloth map representing the world, the manual, and the spellbook. The game even emphasizes that you, the player, should read them instead of interpreting this event as something that happened to the character you're playing. After, hopefully, reading the manual, you wander off further. Hearing tunes of a flute, you follow it to a mysterious Renaissance fair, from whence you find a fortune teller who calls you into her carriage. This is where you create your character. Well, kind of. Instead of the character sheet presented in the previous games, this time you're not dabbling with numbers trying to min-max a specific kind of character. Instead, the fortune teller presents to you a series of moral questions. These questions are not only meant to make you think about what you would do in such situations, but the way you answer the questions determines the character class of your avatar. Having answered the fortune teller's questions, the world around you begins to darken. Her voice grows more distant, and suddenly you find yourself in a strange new land. The game is once more played from a top-down perspective, and navigating the world should be familiar to a player who's played any of the previous Ultima games. But once more, the world has changed and is unfamiliar. This is explained as being a result of the time distortion of Minax and the various calamities caused by Exodus. The place from which you start your exploring from depends on which character class you were assigned to, based on the answers in the character creation, as each character class is linked to a specific town. To begin your journey, it would be best to find the castle of Lord British. This time he serves multiple functions in the game, and his castle is likely to become a sort of base of operations for the player. In a sense, Lord British serves functions that are a combination of the 3 previous games. First of all, when asked for help, he will give a line of text that acts as a sort of quest the player can embark on, replacing the function of the Oracle and returning to his function in Ultima 1. Secondly, when asked for healing, he will heal the party for free. And third, he will once again bestow a party member a level up, as long as they have accumulated enough experience. Here, you can also see one of the massive improvements from the previous games: the talking system. No more is the talking just a simple talk to a person, get a line, and that's it. But now there's an interface to type keywords and get various responses from the inhabitants of the world. This is a key feature in the game and massively shifts the focus from just gaining experience and gold into a more fleshed out adventure. Depending on the character, they can have many different topics they are willing to discuss, and many quests in the game require you to learn a keyword from one person who will also guide you towards some other person, potentially in another city, who will then respond to the keyword you learned, giving you a clue important to your quest. This turns the exploring into a much more involved experience, and using a notebook is practically required, unless you have an extremely good memory, which I don't. The first quests you receive from Lord British are to gain experience and to gather a party of companions. Since in Ultima 4 you no longer create a full party of characters, the incorrect fluff text from the Ultima 3 manual telling you to hire companions you encounter around the world has now become a core part of the game. The possible combination of your party is dependent on 3 variables. What level you are, since the size of your party can only be as large as your level, up to the maximum level of 8. What your class is, as there are 8 companions, and the one who matches your class will be unavailable to recruit. And whether your journey within the correct virtue is far enough. This brings us to the most significant new feature of the game: the virtues. There are 8 virtues in the game: honesty, compassion, valor, justice, sacrifice, honor, spirituality, and humility. Each of the 8 major settlements follow one of these virtues, and is home to the class of characters that is based on this virtue. For example, the city of Yu follows justice, and is the home of the druids, and the city of Trinsic follows honor, and is the home of the paladins. Using this knowledge, readily available in the manual, you can seek out your first companions. While doing so, you are faced with some changes in the overworld map system. Now there are multiple types of landscape. On basic plains you move normally, but there are also areas of limited movement, such as bushes and hilly landscapes, where it's possible that instead of moving, you may lose a turn. The poisonous marshlands of Ultima 2 also return, but this time it is much more dangerous, especially for the beginning adventurer, as getting poisoned without the appropriate spells can be a death sentence. This thankfully is not the end of the world, as dying in this game is merely an obstacle. Whenever you die, your party will be resurrected by Lord British, and you find yourself in his throne room. Unfortunately, this also resets your food and gold to 200, so dying is still not preferable in most situations. To aid the party in their travels, the moon gates also return, and they are functionally the same as in the previous game. The phase of the first moon determines which of the moon gates is open, and the phase of the second moon determines the destination. And to make this even easier, all of the moon gates are marked on the map with a symbol determining the phase of the moons linked to each of the gates. Other means of transportation include things like the ship, which can now turn and only fire its cannons from the sides, or horses, which allow the party faster movement, and a hidden hot air balloon that can be used to reach otherwise inaccessible areas. Combat has also received an overhaul. Now the arenas you fight the enemies in are not just cosmetically different depending on where you fight, but even in the arenas there can be similar obstacles you encounter in the overworld view. Tiles that can make you lose progress, and tiles that will block your projectiles and movement are now scattered around the arenas. The player is still at a slight disadvantage, since the movement and attacks of the party are limited to the 4 main directions, while the enemies can attack diagonally. As a new feature, when you damage enemies enough, there's a chance that they will turn tail and try to flee the battlefield. Allowing them to do so will end the encounter, but this will not reward any experience points, since experience gain still works in the same way it did in Ultima 3. Experience is not shared and is only gained from kills by the character that strikes the final blow. If a fight seems too much for you to handle, this new feature also applies to the player, and by moving past the edge of the combat arena, you can flee from the enemies. Once you have found a companion to join you in your quest, Lord British will bestow to you another quest, this one consisting the bulk of the game. He directs you to seek the Runes of Virtue. No, not the Game Boy game, but runestones linked to each virtue. These runestones will give you passage into the Shrines of Virtue, where the player can meditate using the appropriate mantra. He can also be questioned about the purpose of the quest of the Avatar and of each virtue and principle that are the bases of his new moral philosophy. Finding each of the required objectives can be considered like a small quest. Some are simpler than others, such as talking to someone who reveals they know someone who knows the location of a rune and then just going to find it, or rescuing someone from unjust imprisonment who will then reveal the location of another rune. This, to me, was the most enjoyable part of the game, trying to talk to everyone to slowly gain more information, not only about how to complete the game, but about how the virtues link together and also connect with the other features of the game, how each of the classes follows a specific virtue and what it means to them, how all of the principles combine to create the virtues which you're trying to follow. It truly felt like I was on the path of the Avatar, being thrown into this unfamiliar world with its own rules and rationales, learning about them, and then trying to follow these guidelines on how to be a good person. This is the root of the quest, not the becoming a great warrior who can use brute force to face any adversity, even if that too is part of the game, but the introspection and the joy of learning how to connect all the pieces together into a coherent whole. Journeying to each of the shrines to meditate, you will find out how to increase your connection to the virtues. Not only can you increase your connection, but you can also drift further away. For example, a technique that was somewhat easy and in the first two Ultima games also absolutely necessary, the murdering of innocents for easy loot, will also be dishonorable. Stealing is not just, fleeing from battle is not valorous, and so on. This too changes the game from a simple RPG into a more introspective journey. Not only do you need to do so in a way fitting the avatar of the virtues, fight with honor, help those in need, and be a good and just person in general. There were many reasons why this focus on morality and being a good person was chosen for the game. One of them being how at the time of development, especially in the United States, a new wave of the sort of satanic panic was alive and well, and role-playing and video games were a target for these, what Richard Garriott called in an interview, extremists. As such, Ultima 4 can be seen as a reaction to this kind of attitude the people had. A game to show that not only are games not evil, but they can teach the players the exact opposite by punishing the taking of the seemingly easy way that harms the innocent and rewarding the player for doing good deeds. To keep track of your progress, Castle British has a character called Hawkwind, who evaluates your connection to each of the virtues. If he deems you in tune with a specific virtue, you are then ready to venture back to the shrine to meditate. Doing so, while your virtue is fully attuned, you receive a vision of a runic alphabet and become the avatar of that virtue. Do not get too comfortable though, since doing bad deeds can still break that connection, and you can lose your avatarhood, requiring you to repeat the process. For your next quest, Lord British guides you to learn of the Stones of Virtue, and leads you into the dungeons to find them. Once more, the dungeons are dark, necessitating the use of either torches or magic. Torches can once more only be bought from the guild shop, far from common travel routes. Despite reaching the store being a bit of a chore, this does highlight one humongous improvement over the previous game: the inventory system. In Ultima 3, each character had their own inventory, and to scroll through them, you had to do it manually for each character, while scrolling through a long list of stats and items each character had. This time, the main inventory is unified, and the party shares the same pool of gold and food. The inventory view also doesn't appear in the text parser segment, but instead in the party window, where you can turn pages with the arrow keys to easily scroll through your entire party and inventory without having to reuse the inventory command for each character. This makes equipping your party and checking your equipment vastly more efficient and user-friendly than it was in the last game. The guild store again sells other useful items such as keys and peering gems that serve the same function as they did in the previous game. And if you find the correct clues, the guild shop may also sell a very useful secret item. The second option to light up the dungeons is to use a light spell. The magic system of Ultima 4 has received a complete overhaul, and the spellbook that came with the game is necessary. In the spellbook, the first thing you're introduced to are magical reagents. These are the basis for the new spell system. Each spell requires specific reagents to be mixed together to create the spell, which is then added to your inventory. The amount of spells that can be cast is dependent on the magic points of the character casting the spell and the amount of mixtures in your inventory. Reagents can be bought from magic stores, and some reagents used for the most powerful spells can only be gathered from the wilderness, and finding out from where is one of the quests presented to you by the game. There are also some hidden spells that can be found with thorough exploration. Unfortunately, the mixing of reagents is a bit tedious. Let's say you want to mix 20 pieces of a spell. You have to press mix, select the reagents and accept. Then repeat that 19 more times, which I'm sure you can see will become slightly annoying as you prepare for more dangerous dungeons. The dungeons as well have once more received an overhaul. There are more sprites to show different features and interactable squares, and the dungeons themselves are now in solid colors in the traditional wireframe view. The dungeons also have specific handcrafted encounter rooms, which are traversed in the combat view. These rooms can have any of the secrets and dangers the overworld and city maps also have, from poisonous floors to hidden passages. All of these changes make exploring the dungeons even more intense than they were before, and to survive the perils, the party must be well prepared. The dungeons are also the home of the new character advancement system. Within the dungeons you can find magical orbs that the characters can touch. Doing so will raise one or more of the 3 attributes of the character slightly, while also dealing a sizable amount of damage. Which attribute or attributes get raised depends on the dungeon you are in. This is best explained by a thorough examination of the philosophy of the virtues. The virtues are based on 3 principles. Each of the principles is also represented by a specific color: blue for truth, yellow for love, and red for courage. These 3 principles are the basis of the 8 virtues, which also receive their color based on the principles it's based on. Honesty is pure truth and blue. Compassion is pure love and yellow. Valor is pure courage and red. Justice is a combination of truth and love, making it green. Sacrifice is a combination of love and courage, making it orange. Honor is a combination of truth and courage, making it purple. Then there is spirituality, which is a combination of all principles, making it white. And last, humility based on none, making it black. These are linked to several aspects of the world of Britannia. For example, the attribute of truth is intelligence, which is linked to mages. The attribute of love is dexterity, which is linked to bards. And the attribute of courage is strength, which is linked to fighters. What defines which dungeon raises which attribute depends on which virtue the dungeon is the opposite of. For example, the dungeon opposing honesty is deceit, the dungeon opposing honor is shame, and so on. This interconnectedness of practically everything in the world makes the universe easy to understand after you've started to draw all of these links together. In addition to the attributes being linked to the dungeons themselves are physically linked together via a system of tunnels deep beneath Britannia. There are 3 altar rooms below the dungeons, each dedicated to one principle, linking the dungeons that are related to that principle. Understanding these connections with the features of the world, completing the quest for the Virtue Stones becomes much easier, as does the next quest, where Lord British requests you to venture back into the very depths of the dungeons to the altars of the principles. Inserting the correct stones in the altars, the player receives the 3-part key used to unlock the chamber where the Codex of Ultimate Wisdom resides. The Codex of Ultimate Wisdom is the end goal of the quest of the Avatar. It is a book of infinite knowledge that is only reachable by a complete understanding of the virtues and by someone whose essence is fully attuned to them. This person is the Avatar. The chamber itself is located at the bottom of the Stygian Abyss, a dangerous and impenetrable dungeon. To succeed in reaching the abyss, the player must travel to the 3 strongholds of the principles to learn their mysteries and find the magical items of each principle: the Candle of Love, the Book of Truth, and the Bell of Courage. After the player has attuned to all the virtues and has obtained all of the magical items required, it is possible to breach the defenses of the abyss and venture deep inside. But before that, while searching the world for the mysterious items, it is also possible to find clues about the Skull of Mundane, which is told to still contain great evil within. The player can find the skull, the existence of which is already causing a great turmoil within the earth. The skull can be destroyed to receive a boost in the virtues, but it can also be used to destroy all life around it, with a few exceptions. This obviously lowers the attunement to all virtues. The mystical weapons and armor also return, with a quest reminiscent of the one in Ultima 3, but this time you're given more clues you can use to actually find the locations in which the equipment is hidden. The Abyss itself plays out like a regular, albeit very difficult dungeon. It is divided into 8 levels, each of which is dedicated to one of the virtues. Once reaching the exit, the player must have the appropriate stone and also answer a question pertaining to the virtue the level represents. Without one or the other, passage further below is blocked. At the very bottom lies the chamber of the Codex, and to reach it a final quiz must be answered. For this, the clues in the game are lacking. But they are there if you look closely enough. When fully attuning to the virtues on the shrine, there were those visions with runic alphabets in them. All of these form a word. To get the correct word, the player should remember which alphabet was shown for which virtue, and then arrange them in the order the virtues appear in the abyss, or the little ankh on the side that fills in each time you reach full attunement with a virtue. As you answer the final question and enter the chamber using the 3-part key, you finally reach the Codex. Ultimate wisdom is at your fingertips, and so your quest is complete. Finally, Britannia has gained an avatar, someone whom all subjects of the world can look up to, in the knowledge that enlightenment is attainable and to be strived for. Thus, you can rest assured that life on Britannia will flourish, and the people of the world will only get better. Well, at least you could, if there weren't several more games in the series. Ultima 4 to me represents some of the best moments the series has brought me. Not only is there no big evil in the game, and most of the struggles are internal. How do I act? Should I slaughter the fleeing enemies for easy XP? Should I let them flee because it's the honorable thing to do? Yes, there's a lot of easy loot to steal, but it is wrong to do so, and you would have to make up for those actions in some other way, and so on. From a technical standpoint, the game has improved plenty and addresses many of my issues with some of the previous games. For example, the character status screen and inventory system is now much more user-friendly. The combat is more varied with weapons that have different attributes and landscapes that are more than just visual fluff. The new talking system was also a very welcome change. With this one addition, it was possible to make the questing and exploration much more in-depth and interesting. I thoroughly enjoyed moving through the world, talking to people, trying to understand all of the virtues while simultaneously finding out about hidden magical items and other secrets the world contains. This also marks the point where RPGs as a genre started to move away from a straightforward and cookie-cutter storyline about destroying the great evil, and moved the focus more towards having side quests and branching pathways that not only create a more well-rounded universe, but make the journey to the end much more engaging. I would definitely recommend trying Ultima 4, the way it was originally envisioned to be played, reading the manual, going in as blind as possible, just enjoying the world and the path of enlightenment the game is offering the player. Anyway, that is it for this time, and next we will see another of the entries I see as one of the greatest RPG experiences of all time. But until then, Fintrovert signing out.